My name is John Weidenhammer. I'm the Senior Solutions Architect over here at Cloudbrink. Cloudbrink's been around for a few years now. We are an up-and-coming startup, so we hope to get in that topology visibility that you've previously showed there, Catherine. But we're definitely one that has targeted this remote workforce from both the security and performance side of things, where a lot of the solutions that you're used to in this space do have a lot of the problems that exist that Catherine had spoke about, right? Problems with firewall configurations and port management, issues with certificates and rotating of them, and also just the complexities that you'll get, as Ron had mentioned, from managing multiple infrastructures both on-premise and in the cloud. So Cloudbrink's built this automated moving target defense capability as part of our product to be able to solve for a lot of those issues, as well as some of the other security features that I'll talk about. But in this case, what I wanted to start with is just kind of going through a history lesson and explaining some of the issues that we've seen in this space over the last few years, right? Catherine, you had mentioned the Colonial Pipeline issue. There's been quite a few vulnerabilities and breaches that have happened in the last 5 years, even because of issues with either firewall or certificate-based configurations, right? Those policies need to be consistent across all different platforms, again, both on-prem and in the cloud. A major financial institution back in 2019 had been exploited essentially because of improperly rotated certificates and that weak TLS configurations that existed there. Multiple attacks then happened as well in the supply chain check, which you're probably familiar with in another security product, which was due to, again, poor certificate rotation, right? Weak key management problems that existed there. There was an issue in just a few years ago as well on another enterprise VPN that's out there in the market today that's heavily used, where a vulnerability in one of the SSL VPN packages caused attackers to be able to execute that remote code and get into the company's data there. And even more recently, one of the major content delivery networks that are out there, they're mutually authenticated TLS, so an even higher level of security allowed for some of those revoked certificates that were out there to bypass that security. So overall, the solutions that are out there in the market today, they don't meet the needs of the hybrid network and the hybrid workforce that exists very prevalently that's out there today. So some of the problems that exist is in these legacy VPN providers, you're usually given a static certificate that maybe is issued from your certificate authority that is cut for a very extended period of time, right? You don't want to have to worry about the burden of renewing that. But it's a one-way certificate that handles that encryption layer. And it's something that, if exposed or compromised, is going to then lead to any device on the network being exposed and be able to access the network from anything that uses that same certificate. So the rotation of those certificates is very important. Also, the ability to revoke them and change them out very quickly so that your end-to-end traffic is encrypted is a very important problem that organizations have today. Now, in the traditional sense, a lot of VPNs and ZTNA solutions and SASE products that are in the market, a lot of the communications are very point-to-point, right? It's a gateway or an appliance that runs inside of the data center that requires a ton of inbound and outbound ports that are open to function. And that's where I think great products like Tufin are out there that kind of analyze that and tell you that, hey, these are some of the configuration changes that might be a problem or might be some type of issue. So in that sense, you have these attack surfaces where users are getting attacked from both the certificate side of things, the encryption layer. Not all products have been taking advantage of the latest in security in that space. And it's been a problem for a lot of organizations that just went through that have been, unfortunately, compromised. Cloudbrink also supports a similar company to Johnson Controls, right? We have a partner called View that makes smart remote glass and smart buildings that are out there today. It's a pretty neat technology. They can control all those environmental controls of buildings, but they also have this smart glass technology that goes into all the windows of a building that you can control the tint, as well as even just present videos and content on those to make it more of an advertisement or something that you can use from a work perspective. So pretty cool technology. But they also had those problems and those challenges where they didn't want their customers and their technology to be exposed to these types of vulnerabilities and these types of problems. The other key issue with these is that the performance is pretty low, right? It's a point-to-point connection that has typically a large amount of latency, especially the further you get away from where that gateway might be. And it's also one that the last mile network is very much a challenge to solve for, because it's usually very consumer grade, right? Most of the folks here sitting at home, you have a home ISP that you have a piece of hardware that's issued from that internet service provider, and it's very consumer grade in nature. It's not the enterprise grade routers and switches and firewalls that you have and have the ability to modify in a data center or an office setting, right? So it's been a challenge for even help desks to help solve for these types of issues where there's a trade-off that exists between the legacy VPN providers and the security side of the story here. So it's one that unfortunately remote workers are even a little bit more stressed at times because we've probably been on Zoom calls and Teams calls over the last 5 years or so where you've had connectivity issues. You've been dropped from the calls. You can't hear people. You're asking them to repeat themselves several times. Issues like that exist as well in the network. So what Cloudbrink has built is a solution that re-architected this entire design to be able to give you a more secure and more performant solution than what you're used to in the market today. Our product is built around an overlay network that handles end-to-end encryption using mutually authenticated TLS 1.3, incorporated with this automated moving threat defense capability of networking. We're one of the first to do it in the networking space. You're probably familiar with some others in the security realm that have said this from Gartner and have made products that are more on the endpoint security side of things. But from the network perspective, we've been able to take those problems and solve for them for these customers so that you're no longer having those issues with firewall connectivity or with the certificate side of things being rotated. Our platform by default issues a certificate on a per device basis and rotates them multiple times a day to make sure that their attack surface is being shifted out so frequently from underneath the attackers that it's much more difficult of one to be able to get in the first place. All traffic is encrypted end to end as well across a mid-mile network that we host in all the major cloud providers. So we are a true multi-cloud solution there that hosts in AWS and Azure and GCP, but also some of the localized telcos and data center providers so that our mid-mile network gives you an SD-WAN-like capability all the way to the end user in 100% software, right? There's no hardware associated with it whatsoever. So in that sense, that issue that I mentioned before that companies have of a long time between where the user sits in the gateway can be mitigated because if you reduce down the latency between mid-mile hops, it also helps that performance side of things that much more. Now, our overlay network also is built around performance. We've solved for a lot of the performance-related issues through our overlay network that can solve for things like packet loss and latency and jitter. I can talk about that here in a minute. But the other unique security part of this is that riding all these different networks allows us to more anonymize that traffic across different links. You can think of it more as a cloud-based BGP service, but on a per session basis, we are routing that traffic across different links, again, fully encrypted, but so that the path selection is very difficult. So if you're, again, an attacker trying to trace a connection point, it's something that is always going to be moving across all those different cloud providers to be able to, again, anonymize traffic that much better. Now, on the data center side and in a cloud-based VPC, one of the other attack surfaces is that firewall, right? The inbound ports that need to be opened in order for the gateways and for the users to be able to reach those gateways is typically one where Catherine was mentioning, right, is a problem that a lot of organizations struggle with, and that's usually a pretty big attack surface. So what we've done is we've implemented the secure and software-defined perimeter approach to networking, where instead of needing those inbound ports, you could completely shut down those ports entirely, right? This reduces some of the complexity on the firewall side, where you might not need as much of a robust firewall to even handle this traffic, because we connect through outbound connections only back into those sets of edges and handle the brokering of those connections between the end users and the data center side. So that's a much, much more secure product. We have other components that are part of the SASE solution, like domain filtering and some firewalls as service capabilities all the way to the end user. We do some host-based checks to obviously even give a better security for the device that's connecting in. But it's one that we wanted to give you the best-in-class security with also the best-in-class performance, right? A lot of our customers today, they are in either the financial space, the healthcare space, or across media and entertainment, where a large amount of data needs to be transferred and then leveraged in a very low milliseconds of latency manner, right? It's something that is business critical to a lot of organizations that are out there. So we didn't want to trade off performance with that security style or security aspect of it. So as I mentioned before, we can solve for things with that lossy network, both at the mid mile and the last mile from a network perspective. And most networks at the mid mile are pretty good from a loss perspective in the United States, but this is something that on a global scale, a lot of countries and regions struggle with. There's on an average around 1 to 2% of packet loss that typically exists there. And while that may not sound like a lot from a percentage perspective, it's enough that you will have a lot of connectivity related challenges and issues. And if your business is critical, right, those applications will perform very poorly, especially in VDI and things like that. So our overlay network is built all the way from that end mile, where the last mile where an endpoint the user sits, whether they're in an airport or a public Wi-Fi setting or their home setting, all the way through to either the SaaS-based applications that they might be trying to access or the private on-prem data center access. And we're helping to solve for those performance-related challenges through that overlay network. It's continually learning what problems might exist there. There's over 70 different techniques we are leveraging to be able to improve that connectivity. Some of them are very patented and unique and proprietary to us, but there's some that you probably are familiar with. Doing things like forward error correction, modifying of different window sizes, doing some things like packet piggybacking on an intelligent basis are things that we leverage to be able to improve that connection for the user at the last mile, so that they're able to get up to the line rate of that user's home connection. Right? If you think about I'm outside of Raleigh here with Google Fiber, right? I can get up to that gigabit per second from my home network, which connecting through legacy VPNs, you'll typically see a reduction in speed. Right? You'll get half of that or even less, just because of the encryption layer or some of the latency that's observed there. So the increase in performance is one that a lot of companies come to us just because working from home and working in hybrid sense is very challenging for a lot of organizations. But also on the security side, right? That STP compliant access is something that, from a configuration standpoint, is one that we can help mitigate. It's something that the View company that I mentioned before was very interested in, because they didn't want any attack surface on the inbound side, right? They only wanted those outbound ports to be opened, and it helped achieve that for them very easily. It helps keep the traffic anonymized across the mid-mile, as I mentioned, routing all those different connections from the different providers that we've partnered with there. And it gives you full access to multi-cloud, right? Where some solutions that are out there are very point-to-point. You have to usually click a drop-down and select, hey, I want to connect to my East Coast data center or my West Coast cloud VPC. We're able to connect to multiples of those simultaneously, so that the user experience is very seamless as well. It's not one that you'll have to worry about that from an end user side. So appreciate the time today. That's all I have, but I'm definitely excited about answering any questions you may have for me at this point. And again, appreciate the time, Ron. So thanks so much.